can fake strength. You can fake confidence. You can even fake kindness, ambition, and discipline for a while. But there are a few tiny tells that always slip through, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. Machiavelli lived in a world full of liars, opportunists, and cowards, so he couldn't afford to guess who was strong and who was just loud. He had to know. Fast. Here's what he learned. Weakness rarely announces itself. It leaks. It seeps through tone, timing, posture, and choices. Strong men keep their center. Weak men expose it without meaning to, through patterns they don't even notice. And once you learn to spot those patterns in enemies, colleagues, or yourself, you gain a quiet weapon. Not a sword, a scalpel. The power to identify weakness before it becomes a threat. Most people miss these signals. Machiavelli didn't. He studied people the way a hunter studies movement, calmly, patiently, with attention to what others ignore. Out of that study come 3 behaviors that give weak men away almost instantly. Let's start with the first, and it's subtle. Over-justification. Weak men explain. Strong men decide. That's the whole principle. A weak man needs to defend every choice. He over-explains why he did what he did. He repeats himself to make sure you get it. He tries to get everyone to agree before he moves. He thinks he's being honest. Really, he's being insecure. Machiavelli saw this constantly in court life. A prince sure of his authority spoke sparingly. A minister pretending to be important wouldn't shut up. He needed the room to nod along so he could feel certain of his own logic. That's the giveaway. A man whose identity depends on being liked will drown you in explanations. Not respected, not feared, liked. He's not speaking from conviction. He's asking for permission to exist. Over-justification is a smokescreen for fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of stepping into power without a crowd cheering first. And here's the harsh truth Machiavelli understood. Any man who needs approval before he moves will never be trusted with real power. Real power requires silence. It requires conviction. It requires the ability to act and not feel compelled to explain yourself to anyone who didn't earn that access. So listen closely the next time someone keeps circling the same point, padding their stance with moral language, repeating how reasonable they're being, or piling on context you didn't ask for. You're not hearing strength. You're hearing a slow-motion collapse. The center isn't holding, so he builds scaffolding out of words. What do you do with that? First, you clock it. Don't argue. Don't debate. Just note. This is someone who needs agreement to feel real. That means his direction can be redirected by whoever gives or withholds that agreement. Second, remove the stage. Don't feed the loop by offering reassurance every few seconds. Let the silence sit. Weak men rush to fill silence. Strong men let it work for them. There's another dimension here that Machiavelli would never ignore. Personal audit. It's easy to diagnose others. It's harder to detect the same crack in yourself. Ask, when do you start explaining too much? When do you repeat a point, louder, because you felt it didn't land? When do you tailor your stance to the room instead of making the room adjust to your stance? If you catch yourself doing it, stop mid-sentence. Cut the cushion. Speak the decision once. Then let it stand. Because explanation has a cost. Every extra sentence you tack on to defend yourself devalues your original decision. You train people to think your choices are open to negotiation, and you train yourself to believe you need an audience to move. That is the slippery slope to being managed by the crowd. This is why strong leaders speak late and short. They gather intel quietly. They decide privately. And when they finally speak, it's not a discussion, it's a direction. It doesn't mean they're stubborn. It means they separate strategy, inquiry, debate, exploration, from authority, decision, movement, consequence. Weak men blur those lines. They're deciding while still asking for approval, and everyone can feel the wobble. If you're leading a team, watch meetings through this lens. Who adds clarity with fewer words? Who muddies the room with just to be clear loops? Who needs eye contact after every sentence? Who tries to preempt criticism with a wall of caveats? Those are your tells. Not to humiliate anyone, but to understand where power will fail under pressure. One more tactical move. Change your default response to over-justifiers. Instead of challenging them head-on, which triggers more explanation, slow the tempo. Ask for the conclusion in one sentence. If they can't give it, you've learned everything you need. They were never settled internally. If they can, the noise dies, the room breathes, and you can evaluate the decision on the merits, not on the performance. Machiavelli's first law of detection is simple. Conviction is quiet. Insecurity is verbose. And the man who must narrate every step he takes is telling you he doesn't trust his own feet. That's behavior one. It's subtle, but once you catch it, you'll see it everywhere. From the hallway conversation to the boardroom to the comment section. But the second behavior is colder and far more deceptive because it hides behind a smile. We're going to talk about weaponized niceness, the kind that looks like virtue, but is actually fear with good manners. And if you miss it, you'll hire it, promote it, confide in it, and one day watch it melt the moment things get tense. Now, let's move to the second behavior Machiavelli spotted, what I call weaponized niceness. This one is sneaky because it looks harmless, even admirable. But if you look deeper, you'll see it's not kindness at all. It's submission dressed up with a smile. Here's the difference. A strong man can be kind, but his kindness is selective, deliberate, and it never costs him his self-respect. A weak man, on the other hand, tries to be agreeable at all times. He agrees just to avoid tension. He compliments people so he'll be liked. He apologizes, not because he's wrong, but because he's scared of disapproval. He laughs at jokes that insult him. He stays quiet when he should speak up, and he thinks avoiding conflict will earn him respect. It never does. And here's the real giveaway. When being nice doesn't get him the validation he's chasing, he flips. The smiles fade. Suddenly, he's bitter, sarcastic, passive-aggressive. Why? Because his niceness was never real kindness. It was a strategy to avoid rejection. When that strategy fails, the resentment underneath spills out. Machiavelli studied this constantly. He warned, a prince must know how to do wrong and not use it unless compelled. In other words, restraint is strength, but forced niceness, that's fear. A man who doesn't know how to stand tall tries to stay small, hoping no one steps on him. And Machiavelli knew exactly what that meant. This man cannot be trusted with power, because when the storm comes, and it always does, he'll crumble, or worse, he'll betray you to protect himself. Think about it. True power requires the ability to set boundaries, to say no without flinching, to face tension without collapsing into fake smiles. A strong man can walk into conflict without becoming cruel. A weak man tries to hide from conflict by coating it in sugar. And when you see that compulsive friendliness that curdles under pressure, you've just identified someone who will break the moment loyalty is tested. So what do you do when you spot weaponized niceness? First, don't confuse it with real kindness. The truly strong may be generous, compassionate, even warm, but they can also turn cold in an instant if you cross a line. The weak man can't. His entire posture is built around avoiding that moment. Second, don't rely on him. Because when pressure mounts, he won't protect you. He'll protect his fragile image. Now here's the tough part. You have to check for this in yourself too. Ask, do you say yes to avoid conflict? Do you apologize out of fear, not truth? Do you hold back your real thoughts because you're worried about being disliked? If so, you've fallen into the trap. And the fix is not cruelty, it's clarity. Learn to say no without a speech. Learn to disagree without softening every word. Learn to be silent when fake politeness is expected. That's how you reclaim respect. Machiavelli's brilliance was not just spotting weakness in others, it was training himself to kill it within. He knew that people-pleasing wasn't virtue, it was vulnerability. And vulnerability in the wrong place isn't noble, it's exploitable. So remember this. The man who always smiles, always agrees, always stays nice, that man is dangerous, but only to himself. Because niceness without backbone is a leash waiting for someone else to grab. That's the second behavior. Now, let's move to the third one. The most desperate and the easiest to see once you know the signs. It's humiliating to watch, but also incredibly useful to recognize. Machiavelli called it display addiction. And if you want to know why some men melt without attention, you're about to find out. Now we get to the third behavior, the one Machiavelli considered the most humiliating of all. Display addiction. You've seen this man before. He's the one who can't sit still without recognition. He needs to be seen, to be praised, to be envied. Every conversation somehow circles back to him. Every win gets exaggerated into a spectacle. Every silence feels like death, so he fills it with noise, posting, boasting, performing. Machiavelli noticed men like this everywhere. He understood something most people still miss. The man who constantly needs to be seen isn't confident. He's terrified of being forgotten. That fear isn't born from lack of money or opportunity. It comes from a deeper disease, what you might call identity rot. Because here's the truth. Display addiction is not confidence. It's panic. It's the survival mechanism of someone with no inner foundation. If no one is watching, he feels worthless. If no one is talking about him, he feels invisible. His sense of value disappears the second attention fades. And that's why Machiavelli saw these men as liabilities. They will do anything for attention. Lie, embellish, betray. They'll expose secrets, turn on allies, even create enemies out of thin air if it means someone is watching. To them, silence feels like death. Stillness feels like irrelevance. Being forgotten feels like annihilation. But Machiavelli's genius was that he didn't just despise this trait. He used it. He knew that a man addicted to display is a puppet waiting to be controlled. If you want to ruin him, you don't need to attack. You just ignore him, take away the spotlight, cut off the applause, make him feel invisible, and watch how fast he breaks. Because while strong men train in private, grow in silence, and strike without warning, the display addict can't last 5 minutes without an audience. He's predictable. He's desperate. And that makes him easy to manipulate. Now step back and put all three behaviors together. Over-justification, weaponized niceness, display addiction. When they combine, you don't get a villain, you get a void. A man so hollow he takes the shape of whoever is stronger than him. That was Machiavelli's greatest fear. Not the cruel, not the loud, but the empty. Because emptiness can be filled with anything, and when the wrong person fills it, destruction follows. But here's where Machiavelli was different from everyone else. He didn't just identify weakness, he weaponized it. He saw these patterns as leverage points, as ways to predict, control, and outmaneuver men who couldn't control themselves. So the question becomes, how do you do the same? How do you turn the weakness of others into your advantage without them even realizing it? That's where Machiavelli's strategy gets cold, precise, and brilliant. And it's exactly what we'll break down next. Here's where Machiavelli separated himself from everyone else. Most men see weakness and react with disgust, annoyance, or frustration. Machiavelli saw opportunity. He turned those fragile behaviors, over-justification, fake niceness, and display addiction, into tools. He understood that spotting weakness wasn't the end of the game. It was the beginning. Because weak men don't break when tested. They melt. And once you know someone will melt, you know exactly how to use them. Politics, war, business, alliances, it didn't matter. If you could identify weakness early, you could steer it without lifting a finger. So how did Machiavelli use this knowledge? He studied patterns and played people against themselves. Take the over-justifier, the man who explains every move. Instead of arguing with him, Machiavelli would listen, nod, maintain eye contact, say things like, "That makes perfect sense." And instantly, that man would attach himself to Machiavelli, craving more of that rare validation. Before long, he wasn't just talking to Machiavelli. He was working for him, defending him, spying for him. All because Machiavelli gave him the illusion of being understood. But it wasn't understanding, it was leverage. Now consider the people-pleaser, the agreeable, endlessly nice man. Machiavelli didn't dismiss him. He gave him a role, a job, a place in something bigger than himself. That niceness was just fear in disguise. And Machiavelli knew betrayal would terrify him. So he kept him close, not because of loyalty, but because losing Machiavelli meant losing the fragile identity that kept him standing. And that was leverage too. Then came the display addict, the man who needed applause like oxygen. Machiavelli fed him the stage, let him speak in meetings, let him take credit publicly for ideas that secretly served Machiavelli's goals. While the addict basked in attention, Machiavelli quietly wrote the script behind the scenes. Because if you give a weak man the illusion of power, he'll never question who actually holds it. That's the Machiavellian masterpiece. Empires built not on brute force but on psychological engineering. Weak men desperate for approval, recognition, or safety ended up constructing palaces, alliances, and defenses on his behalf, without realizing they were serving him. And if they ever turned against him, he didn't fight. He withdrew the very thing they were addicted to: approval, safety, attention. They collapsed on their own. Machiavelli's coldest rule was this: never let a weak man believe he's your equal. The moment he does, he overreaches. He fantasizes about rebellion. He forgets who made him. So Machiavelli kept the gap wide. Just enough reward to keep them moving. Never enough for them to believe they didn't need him anymore. And if one of them tried to challenge him, he didn't retaliate. He replaced them. Because the world has no shortage of weak men starving for validation. But there was only one Machiavelli. This is the art of puppeteering weakness. You don't argue, you don't demand, you don't expose them. You give them just enough of what they crave until they mistake their chains for loyalty. And that's the essence of Machiavellian control. The best form of manipulation doesn't look like manipulation. It looks like friendship. It looks like mentorship. It looks like presence. And while weak men orbit approval, you stand still, silent, calculating, until the strings tighten without them even knowing. But here's the twist: Machiavelli never forgot. Spotting weakness in others is useless if you don't hunt it inside yourself. Because the cracks you ignore in your own armor are the very ones the world will strike first. And that's where the real battle begins. Now we turn to the final and most brutal lesson Machiavelli left behind. Weakness isn't just something you spot in others. It's something you must hunt inside yourself. Because the same cracks you exploit in others are the cracks the world will use against you if you don't seal them. Machiavelli treated self-mastery like a daily war, not a war with armies, but with whispers. Tiny lapses that seem harmless until they reveal everything. Over-explaining when silence would have been stronger. Saying yes just to avoid conflict. Rushing to fill the quiet because you felt exposed. Smiling when you wanted to say no. Every one of those small behaviors was a leak, and he refused to let them live unchecked. He trained himself to notice when he started talking too much, when he repeated a point, when he shifted his stance based on who was in the room. Each time he asked, "Am I speaking from conviction, or am I begging for acceptance?" If the answer was the second, he stopped. Because a man who begs for validation forfeits his authority. He also trained his yes. Every time he agreed to something, he asked, "Would I say yes if I didn't fear losing their approval?" If not, he declined. No apology, no excuse. Because he knew a word that carries no weight isn't a word of power. And then there was silence. Weak men rush to fill it. Strong men weaponize it. Machiavelli practiced standing still in noise, measuring his comfort inside the quiet, until silence no longer felt like exposure. It felt like presence. And presence, once mastered, becomes intimidation without effort. But the most dangerous addiction he resisted was display. Weak men crave the spotlight because it gives them identity. Strong men train in private, vanish until they're ready, then arrive with force. Machiavelli didn't build anticipation with announcements. He built it with absence. When he finally moved, it wasn't seen as progress. It was seen as arrival. That's what made people stop in their tracks. He closed every door weakness could walk through, not because he wanted to look powerful, but because he refused to let anyone else hold leverage over him. He killed the behaviors he exploited in others before the world could ever exploit them in him. That's why his presence was unnerving, not because he was cruel, but because he was unreadable. And this is the real key. Respect isn't begged for. It isn't demanded. It's engineered. When you remove every trace of fear-driven behavior, when you stop justifying, when you stop seeking applause, when you stop giving free access to your emotions, you become something unsettling, something untouchable. That's when people begin to adjust to you. They measure their words around you. They soften their tone. They try not to expose their own weaknesses in your presence. Why? Because you've mastered what they haven't. You've silenced the craving for constant validation. You've trained yourself to stand calm where others crumble. And that makes your approval rare, and rare things are always valuable. This is Machiavelli's final tactic. Make your respect expensive. Don't give it easily. Don't flatter casually. Don't smile for free. Make people earn it. Because once they realize you aren't swayed by charm, pressure, or popularity, they adjust. They rise to your standard, or they vanish. Either way, you win. That's how you rule. Not with noise, not with force, but with presence. The kind of presence that makes people ask, "Why does he make me uncomfortable? Why do I care what he thinks of me? What does he see that I don't?" That isn't intimidation. That's power. And the most Machiavellian truth of all, you don't expose weak men by confronting them. You expose them by never needing to. While they talk, justify, and perform, you stay silent, still, unreadable. Until one day, they realize they lost to someone who never even played their game. That's the final lesson. Machiavellian power isn't about shouting louder. It's about becoming the man who reveals nothing, yet sees everything. The man whose silence speaks louder than their best words. The man who doesn't just command respect, he leaves no other option.